Hey everyone, Playtendoguy here, and today I'm going to do something a little bit different. Instead of reviewing loads of the latest games, I'm going to try and talk about a single topic for a video. And today, for my first video, I'll be talking about the handheld that Nintendo seriously will not give up on, the 3DS. I'm going to give a bit of history about it, reception, some of my favourite games, and generally my views on the handheld. So without further ado, let's go! The Nintendo 3DS, also known by many gamers as the handheld that will not die already, is the successor of the incredibly popular Nintendo DS that launched all the way back in 2004 or 2005 if you lived in the UK like I do. The 3DS was the next generation of Nintendo's handheld, and it was easily the most powerful one yet. The main draw, or should I say gimmick of the handhelds, was the ability to play games in stereoscopic 3D. Now Nintendo did try their hands at 3D quite a few times, quite famously with the huge flop that was the Virtual Boy and later trying to include it into the GameCube, but ultimately they scrapped that idea. So the 3DS was Nintendo trying to get back into the 3D game. This was around the days when 3D TVs and movies were pretty big business, so it seemed like a perfect time to release it. Instead of the 3D that popping out of the screen, the 3DS's 3D was a sort of depth 3D. A good example of this is like looking into a little diorama. The 3D test was a good showcase of what I mean. The 3DS was also a big step up in the graphics department compared to the DS. Whilst the DS games looked a little bit better than the N64 games, the 3DS is around the same as the Nintendo GameCube. Comparing DS Mario, Pokemon and Zelda games to how they look on the 3DS, the difference is night and day. Nintendo consoles normally launch with a few little apps. For example, the Wii had the News Channel, the Weather Channel, and the Me apps, but the 3DS easily had the largest amount of apps and things to do on day one than any other Nintendo release. The 3DS had the eShop that housed many awesome indies and retro games, Face Raiders that was bundled in and was a fun little AR shooter gallery that allows you to take pictures of someone's face, then transport them into a game as one of the enemies to shoot. Each 3DS came with a pack of AR cards that if you scanned them with your 3DS you could play a collection of minigames and view models of various Nintendo characters. It was a great idea that Nintendo did explore with the Kid Icarus Uprising game, and a huge collection of cards was released for that, but bar that, AR was pretty much abandoned. Street Pass was a cool new feature that allowed you, if you kept your 3DS in sleep mode, to connect with other 3DSs close to your area, and you could receive their Miis for the Street Pass Plaza and its many minigames held within. If the player you connected with had the same game as you and it was a Street Pass compatible title, then you could share items and features for compatible games, which was also a cool idea. And there was Spot Pass, which would connect to local wireless networks and you'd receive demos, apps, updates, and items for games. This and Street Pass was a brilliant idea that really showed how connected the 3DS actually was. Just a shame not many folks use the features now, and many apps like the Anime Channel and the brilliant Letterbox mode, which allowed friends to share little messages and drawings with friends, were scrapped. But hands down, the best app on the 3DS was also the Wii U's greatest app, Miiverse. It was available on the 3DS in late 2014, and this allowed you to comment on your favourite games community and make new friends. It was a brilliant time waster and a lot of fun, and honestly, probably one of my favourite social network little apps ever. And it was a massive shame when the service was axed on both consoles in late 2017. I really do miss it, and I really do hope Nintendo bring it back in some form or the other for the Switch. 3DS launched in Japan in late February 2011, whilst the rest of the world got it a month later in March 2011. It retailed in the US for $250, whilst in the UK and Europe the price was set by the retailers. So in the UK it was pretty expensive at 230 quid. Handheld came in two colours, Cosmic Black and Aqua Blue. I went for the blue one and I must admit I really did like the design. The three different tones of blue was a great touch. As for the launch games I picked up with the handheld was Street Fighter 4, Nintendogs plus Cats, Pilot Wings, and in my eyes the best game of launch, Ridge Racer 3D. Street Fighter 4 was a blast to play on the 3DS and was a very faithful port of the console game. Nintendogs and Cats was just a nicer looking version of the DS game, but with added cats. Pilot Wings Resort was a fun, if a little limited, expansion on the island flyover minigame that was in Wii Sports Resorts. And then there was Ridge Racer 3D, which in my eyes was arcade racing perfection. In handled like a dream, and whilst there was no online multiplayer, it did have a great single player offering. As for the other launch games, there was Tom Clancy's Ghost Recon Shadow Walls. That's, whilst a mouthful to say, was a very decent modern set and strategy RPG. That was the closest thing to an Advanced Wars the 3DS has got. And apart from those games, the rest of the games on offer range from so-so, like the upbeat port of Rayman 2, and the awful Asphalt 3D, which was completely ass. The 3DS's launch titles did have a big selection of games, and whilst there were some pretty great games to buy, there just weren't no big first-party Nintendo titles at launch. Yes, Pilot Wings and Nintendogs was nice enough, but everybody wanted a new Mario or Zelda, and that did show in the following months. Big releases were sparse for the next few months, with only Dead or Alive Dimensions providing any sort of enjoyment leading up to the summer, and subsequently to the lack of big releases, sales of the handheld was falling, and projects were also being canned. It also didn't help that over here in the UK, the media made it their mission to scare parents off buying their children the handheld, due to the 3D could damage their children's eyes if the child was under the age of 7. It certainly didn't look great for Nintendo. Things eventually picked up in the summer with the first Zelda game on the handheld, with the launch of Ocarina of Time 3D, and damn, it was a beautiful remake that really was the game 3DS gamers were waiting for. Resident Evil The Mercenaries 3D also arrived, and it was fine, but it was far too expensive for an extension of an unlockable mode that was in previous Resident Evil games. In late July, due to the fall in sales, Nintendo decided to do the bold decision of cutting the price of the 3DS by nearly a third. In America, it went from $250 to $170, whilst here in the UK and Europe, it was again up to the retailers, but we did receive a decent discount from around 230 quid to a much more reasonable 170. And to ease the anger that would erupt from early adopters, Nintendo launched the Nintendo 3DS Ambassador Program that treated everybody who bought the console before the price drop a selection of 10 NES games for free and a further 10 free GBA games later that year. Whilst it may have been a bit of a slap in the face for early adopters like myself, it was nice that Nintendo rewarded us for our support, but this price drop was the start of something bigger and better for the handheld. The price cut began and a better marketing campaign kicked in, telling people that this weren't Nintendo DS, no, this was Nintendo 3DS, whilst showing how powerful the graphics are and the ability to play games in 3D. Sales started to pick up, but it wasn't until Super Mario 3D Land, when it launched in November, that the handheld hit the home running. The game was glorious, it felt like a mini galaxy on the go. Each level offered plenty of new ideas, and once you completed the main game, a second harder game unlocked with loads of challenging levels. It was also one of the games that really did use the 3DS to its full potential. And boy, the fun didn't stop there. Just weeks after Mario made his 3DS debut, Mario Kart 7 power slided onto the 3DS and subsequently proved to be a big hit with families and gamers at Christmas. I enjoyed Mario Kart 7, but I was disappointed that the mission mode from Mario Kart DS was absent. Still, the game was a blast to play and ultimately saved the 3DS from being a flop. After the troubled year that was 2011 was out the way, the 3DS's growing pains was pretty much gone, and the handheld proved it could be popular. 2012 saw the bigger, more anticipated releases finally coming out, and this constant stream of brilliant first and decent third-party support continued throughout the years. As typical with most Nintendo handhelds, the 3DS saw various different iterations. The first new iteration was in 2012, and that was the 3DS XL. This was, as you could guess, a 3DS with bigger screens, and I must admit I greatly preferred the bigger screens over the original, now small looking screens. The 3DS XL did look a little bit on the cheap side compared to the elegant original look. Then in 2013, Nintendo thought realism be damned and released the odd-looking 2DS, a new child-friendly take on the 3DS but with no 3D and the added ability of doubling up as being a doorstop. The 2DS couldn't fold in half and resembled a slice of bread in its looks, and many fans did really wonder what Nintendo was thinking. But actually, it was a clever piece of marketing. It wasn't made for gamers, it was a cheap £80 entry into the magical world of Nintendo handheld gaming, and it was tough enough to withstand some rough and tumble that kids would no doubt give it. In 2015, we got not one but two new 3DS consoles released at the same time. The new 3DS and new 3DS XL was essentially mid-gen upgrades for the 3DS, very much like the DSi was for the DS. The new 3DS and 3DS XL offered super stable 3D that would track your head and you'd never lose a 3D sweet spot like you did on the original models. Other inclusions was better load times and system performance in general. This handheld also included some new shoulder buttons and a new small little second analog stick called the C-Stick. This little stick was an odd little thing that didn't really read that precise in games when you tried to move the camera. The difference between the new 3DS and its XL version was that the new 3DS was small and you could buy custom faceplates to accessorize your handheld with cool designs. The XL on the other hand ditched the custom faceplates and had a much bigger screen and a sleek and shiny, rather elegant look to it, similar to that of the original 3DS. I went for the new 3DS XL mainly due to the fact that I love the big screens and it was much more comfortable to hold. The final iteration of the 3DS for now was the new 2DS XL, which released in 2017, and this one essentially was the new 3DS XL but without the 3D and a much cheaper price point of around 130 quid. Around the time of the launch of the 2DS XL, Nintendo discontinued the new 3DS and its XL counterpart. This whole push for the 2DS XL wasn't a surprise. At the last few years, Nintendo hasn't really bothered to include 3D in its 3DS games. It's a shame that the developers decide to leave out 3D in their games, as a 3DS game without the option to play 3D seemed weird at first, but as the handheld is slowly going on the way out, I guess it was a way to cut cost. 3DS would have been nothing if it wasn't for the games, and my word, Nintendo certainly delivered the goods here. Whilst the early days were slow, once 2012 started, the 3DS constantly received loads of brilliant titles, and in 2013 in particular was an unbelievable year for releases. The releases kinda did wane in late 2015 with only a handful of notable titles releasing each year after, but nevertheless, here are some of the titles. As for the games we had the double whammy of Mario 3D Land and Mario Kart 7, as I said before. We also had a selection of Nintendo 64 games remade for the 3DS, like the inclusion of Ocarina of Time, Majora's Mask, and Star Fox 64. Each of these titles were a fantastic trip down memory lane. Kid Icarus finally returned after 2 decades without a game with Uprising. The series made a brilliant comeback, even though you could only play it in short bursts due to the awkward control scheme that made many players' hands ache. New Super Mario Bros. 2 was a lackluster sequel to the rather unoriginal and oversaturated series. This entry main goal was to nab 1 million gold coins. The reward for this was one of the most disappointing rewards in gaming history, a different title screen. I took on the task to get 1 million coins and I did it, and only after getting 1 million coins I realised I had too much time on my hands. Super Smash Bros. For 3DS also defined what we thought was ever possible by bringing the series to handheld for the first time ever. The version had all the characters of the Wii U version, whilst its stages focused on handheld titles. Content-wise, it was a pretty respectable package, including an arcade all-star mode as well as the fun Smash Run mode. It was all made for an incredibly enjoyable game that, in my eyes, was much more enjoyable than its Wii U counterpart. Kirby had 2 superb games in Triple Deluxe and Planet Robobot. Both were fantastic takes on the traditional Kirby formula and much better than the Switch's recent Star Alloys game. Fire Emblem Awakening arrived on the 3DS, and this was meant to be the last-ditch attempt to save the series, and thankfully Awakening was a big seller and saved the franchise from being dormant. After the success of Awakening, Nintendo went on a Fire Emblem fest with 3 different versions of Fates and a remake of the Japanese-only second game Shadows of Valentia. Animal Crossing New Leaf, Luigi's Mansion 2, and The Legend of Zelda: A Link Between Worlds rounded off a brilliant 2013, delivering some of the best experiences of the handheld. Mario Golf and Tennis hit the 3DS, and both were decent experiences, whilst Professor Layton hit the 3DS with his final 2 mainline games, as well as a fun spin-off with Phoenix Wright, which was utterly ridiculous but brilliant at the same time. Pokemon, like on the DS, had 2 generations on the 3DS, first with X and Y and then later with Sun and Moon. Bizarrely, X and Y didn't get an expanded version, but Sun and Moon got Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon, which were sequels. We also got a remake of Ruby and Sapphire, as well as several so-so spin-offs to make for a pretty great showing for Pokemon on the 3DS. Mario and Luigi got 2 new entries in the So-So Dream Team and the rather enjoyable Paper Mario crossover, Paper Jam. Superstar Saga and Bowser's Inside Story also got the remake treatment. Unfortunately, Partners in Time has yet to get one. Paper Mario also had his own gaming sticker start, and yeah, this one really didn't stick with me. I didn't like the way it took the franchise, though I thought Color Splash on the Wii U was much better. Metroid had two titles. The first was a spin-off called Federation Force, and unpopular opinion alert, I actually really enjoyed the title. Yeah, it wasn't a proper Metroid, but I had a blooming good time with it. Those who felt underwhelmed with Federation Force was treated to the brilliant remake of Metroid 2. Samus Returns was a proper Metroid game that fans really deserved, and it was released a year later to critical acclaim. Other 3DS first-party titles that are worth a shout-out include Sushi Striker, a fun little puzzler with added sushi, WarioWare Gold, and Rhythm Paradise Mega Mix, which are both sort of best-of collections of both series, Ever Oasis, a great mix of various popular games, Animal Crossing got a first spin-off with Happy Home Designer, we also got My First Pikmin, or should I say Hey Pikmin, which was a rather basic but quite enjoyable Pikmin platformer. Third parties also didn't slouch on the 3DS. We also had the brilliant Resident Evil Revelations, a console quality Resident Evil title on the small handheld, that even though it's been ported several times before, it still plays best on 3DS. Konami brought Metal Gear Solid to the 3DS with a fantastic port of Snake Eater. Square Enix had two awesome ports of Dragon Quest VII and 8. Bravely Default and Bravely Second came from the team behind the recent Switch RPG Octopath Traveler, and they both were some of the best RPG adventures on the system. Kingdom Hearts Dream Drop Distance was an incredibly enjoyable spin off to the hugely popular Disney Final Fantasy series. As for the Square's most iconic RPG series, Final Fantasy, well, it had a pretty poor showing as no mainline entries actually appeared, but we did have two fun spin offs in Theatre Rhythm Final Fantasy and Explorers. One was an enjoyable rhythm game, whilst the other was a decent Monster Hunter like game. As for Monster Hunter, we had loads. We had an updated version of 3, a brand new entry in 4, a sort of best of compilations and generations. These 3 entries are all incredibly enjoyable. My favourite was probably 4 due to the huge amount of content and the fun new mechanics. Monster Hunter even received a Pokemon-like spin-off in Stories, and it was a fantastic little light-hearted RPG that looked amazing and played really well. Shame not many folks actually played it though. Atlas had a whole host of titles on the 3DS from its Shin Megami Tensei and Etrian Odyssey franchises. As for other highlights, we had the brilliant reboot of the Shinobi franchise, Phoenix Wright had a couple of new titles as well as a load of remakes. Rhythm Thief filled the void for rhythm games in the early days as it was a fun mix of Professor Layton and the Rhythm Paradise franchise. All these games I've just detailed are just retail games, and that's not even talking about the huge range of games that Eshop offers, from virtual console games that span the NES, Game Boy, Game Gear, and Super Nintendo. The Eshop was also filled to the brim with original games. The Eshop offered plenty of fun games to play for very little money. Some of these highlights include SteamWorld Dig and Heist, Pool Box, Full Box, Box Boy, Dylan's Roland Weston, Sega 3D's Classic Range, and Mighty Switch Force, just to name a few. All in all, these past 8 years with the 3DS have been really enjoyable. Yes, the early days were hard and decent releases were sparse, but once that price cut hit and the duo of Mario 3D Land and Mario Kart 7 came out, the train really never stopped running with new releases till around 2016 when the releases started to dry up a bit. The handheld's library of games are full of amazing titles, and the ability to play DS games enhanced the library of games you could play even further. But now, as the releases for the 3DS are few and far between, I think back and think I had a bloomin' fun time with the 3DS, and it really did show Nintendo at their best, delivering plenty of enjoyable games that provide endless hours of enjoyment. Thank you for watching to the end. I hope you like it. If you did, hit that subscribe button, and again, thank you for watching, and until next time, happy gaming. Bye!